I think we're going to get started, and Peter will probably join us in a little bit. So this is the Sherborn Advisory Committee meeting for September 14th, 2022. I'm Dan Sickle, the incoming chair of advisory, and we will get going. I think we're supposed to start with a roll call to bring the meeting to order. So let's just spin through. I'm going to just go through in the order on my screen. Here's Peter coming in. So Natalie.
Sure.
Nora. Steve.
Hi.
That's great. That's double. Wasim.
Double unmute. Aye.
Perfect. I think that's everybody. I'm an aye as well. Peter, we're just voting on opening the meeting if you want to jump in.
Aye.
Perfect. Okay. So first off, somebody willing to volunteer for taking minutes tonight? Don't everybody jump at once.
I can do it. I can.
Okay, that would be great.
I'll check in next time. I'm happy to do it for.
Okay,
next time.
great. Thank
So
you.
I can see how the minutes look like again. Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So I think the next thing we do is I read through the agenda, and then we just check to see if there are any items that have come up that aren't on the agenda. So just doing that. We're going to start with liaison reports, and then our current meeting items are with Steve Jeremiah joining us. We'll do a brief round of introductions, couple just follow-ups on liaison assignments. I sent around that document with some proposed meeting dates for the rest of 2022. It's just make sure that either works for people, or if it doesn't, make whatever adjustments we need to. Heidi Doyle is going to lead us in a discussion about OPEB funding policy. A draft proposal there. We'll then turn to a pretty loose preliminary discussion of budget guidance, and then we've got a couple of rounds of minutes to approve. So anybody have a topic that wasn't on the agenda that couldn't have been anticipated that we should be adding in? Okay, great. I will take that as a sign that we can move forward. All right. So on introductions, delighted that Steve Jeremiah is joining us on the committee. We did a round of intros in our last meeting, but given that Steve's new, I thought he would appreciate just hearing a little bit from everybody. He and I had a chance to meet up last week, so I don't think I need to do an intro for me, but as we've done in the past, just a couple quick words. And Steve, if you want to start, and then we'll go around everybody else.
Would that be this, Steve?
Yes, Steve Jeremiah,
Okay.
if you want to start. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Again, my name's Steve Jeremiah. I moved to Sherborn with my 3-year-old son and then pregnant wife in 1995. We have lived in 2 separate places. The first home we had was over on Brush Hill Road near Corsebrook Farm, and then we moved over to Hollis Street in 2003, and have been at 23 Hollis Street since 2003. We raised both of our boys here, and I, in the past, have served both on the Historic District Committee and the Historical Commission. Historical Commission back when we did the historic house inventory in town, and then was on the Historic District Committee when the police station, fire station, and town hall were redone, in addition to some of the senior housing. You know, it's a pleasure to serve on some sort of committee for the town again, and you know, happy to answer any questions should they crop up.
Great. Thanks, Steve, and really appreciate your joining the committee. Should be an interesting year. Natalie, do you want to just say a couple words?
Sure. I've been on Dopping Brook Road for 30 years. I raised both my children here. I've been on this committee for, I don't know how long now, 4 years, 3 years or something. I'm also on the Sherborn Business Association and helped run the Brew Fest. And I don't know, that's about it. I work full time. I'm from the Midwest. That's about all
All
you
right.
need to know.
Thanks, Natalie. Nora?
Hello, Steve, this is only my second meeting, so welcome. I'm a newbie here, and I've been in Sherborn since my son was 3, so 20 years ago, and my daughter was born here. I've raised 2 children here. They're now 24 and 20. I can't believe it. Time flies. And I've done the Sherborn Shuffle also. I lived on Morse Road, and now I live on 114 Woodland Street. So happy to be here and happy to serve.
All right. Thanks, Nora. Steve Tsai?
Hi, this is my 6th and final year on advisory. I was the chair for the past 3 years. I live on Green Lane. I've got an 8-year-old, and I moved here about 9 years ago. And I'm a veterinary radiologist. So I really have no business being on this committee, but here I am. And that's about it.
Thanks, Steve. Every business being on this committee, I'd say. Mike, you want to say just a few words?
Sure. So also my second meeting. I'm Mike Winters. I live at 45 Maple Street. Moved here in 2012 with my wife, and we now have a almost 5-year-old who's attending preschool at Pine Hill. And I am a lawyer with an office in Holliston. So that's the quick rundown.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Peter?
Yes, Steve, welcome. This is my 38th advisory meeting, and not that I'm counting, but I count the long days as 3, so that adds up. In my last year, after 2 terms, been in Sherborn for 20 years. My 2 children went to the school system. They're in college or out gainfully employed now, hopefully to keep me in the lifestyle I'm accustomed to at some point, in assisted living. I've been in professionally healthcare finance my whole career in Massachusetts, and glad that you decided to serve all 3 of the new members, because I know the first year is like drinking from a fire hose, where you get a lot of information thrown at you, and you assimilate it definitely by the 20th meeting.
If not by the 38th. Okay, thanks, Peter. Wasim?
Steve, welcome to advisory. I've been on advisory for, I think this is my 4th year. I joined around the same time that Natalie did. I've been in Sherborn, I think, since 2015. And I have 3 daughters. All of them are attending Pine Hill right now. And yeah, I look forward to Peter having all the kids out of that. Out of colleges and everything and done. So, but nice to meet you. I live on Peckham Hill.
All right. Thanks, Wasim. Okay, so that's great. And so, Steve, again, a big welcome from all of us. Delighted that you're joining us. Okay, so so liaison reports. First on that topic, just I didn't. We have one small correction to our list of liaison assignments, but just wanted to check in and see if anybody if there were any. I hadn't heard anything, but if anybody had any concerns, issues with that, let me know now or let Steve and me know soon. The one very, very minor change is, and the people involved all know about this, Jeannie Guthrie is going to be the budget contact for Farm Pond and Zoning Board of Appeals. So I changed that on the master spreadsheet, and assuming that's the only small change, I'll send that around probably tomorrow, just so everybody has the latest version. Also, we'll just mention that for our rep on Capital Budget Committee, so Peter agreed to be the voting member on Capital Budget, and Nora is going to be the non-voting member participant in all the Capital Budget Committee work. And my understanding is that Mary Wolf and Corey Lincoln, who I think is going to be chair of that committee, met today to kind of get stuff set up. So hopefully that will get going. Hopefully that will get going soon. And if I hear anything from either of them, I will pass that on, Nora and Peter, to both of you. Although you may hear before I do, but whatever I hear, I'll be sure to pass on. So any other? I've got a couple things I'll mention, but before that, any other? I know it's early days, only September 14th, but any other liaison reports or things to come in?
So your comment there, Dan, was just that Jeannie is the contact for Farm Pond, right?
Yep, that's right.
And the zoning is the other one. Okay. I already contacted the Farm Pond, and Jeannie did chime in and mention that she's the budget contact.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Perfect.
And then the other one, you said zoning. I think that's
ZBA, yeah, Zoning Board of Appeals. And I'll send a new spreadsheet around tomorrow, just so everybody will have, the latest version.
And I don't know, I'll just mention, maybe you were already going to plan on mentioning this for Steve's sake, but Steve and I were on police, and I was waiting to have an intro before I reach out to the police and copy Steve, so Steve knows what the background is.
Yeah, okay, sounds good.
Dan, this is Mike. I think we talked briefly about the update I got from the Conservation Commission. Not a big issue, but probably just a little foreshadowing of some other issues that we'll end up seeing from other groups, that they're hiring for the conservation agent. It's a backfill position. They have an interim person in place at this point, but they're looking to hire a full-time replacement for that position. The position has been previously listed as a $32 an hour position, and they're telling me that they expect to need to push that dollar amount up to $40 an hour, just to be at all competitive in the marketplace. So it just seems to be a little bit of potential foreshadowing for maybe what we're going to hear from other groups.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. That's helpful. Any others that anybody else has? And then I've got a couple to just share, but wanted to give everybody else, see if there's anything else. All right. So the couple I have, just kind of a heads up that the Sustainability Department received a $38,000 grant for work on the town's climate action plan. I think the ideas are going to hire a consultant who does those kinds of reports and plans. And I think the 38K is meant to go to that. And I think Dorothy and Gino are going to be putting together a working group or steering committee for that. And I think they are looking for representation from a wide range of town boards and committees. And at least at the select board meeting, when Dorothea talked about this, she mentioned hoping that somebody from advisory would be interested in joining that. So if anybody is interested, just let me know in coming days and we can kind of pass that along. So when they get going, the right person could be on email lists and so on to get involved in that. I think it'll be pretty interesting work. It was, of course, from the town meeting last year with the town will have a climate action plan, and I think there'll be some interesting things for everyone in that group to hash out and thinking about what really ought to be in that and what sort of shape it should take. So please let me know if anybody's interested, and if there's a lot of interest, I don't know, we can flip a coin or draw straws or whatever, but I'm guessing that's not going to be a problem. So just let me know if anybody's interested in that. I was also just going to mention from the last select board meeting, They approved a request from Sean Colleen to spend $14,000 out of the used equipment revolving fund. So this is a fund that was set up some years ago so that when a piece of town equipment is sold, the proceeds from the sale go into this revolving fund, and then it can be used for small purchases of equipment by various departments. So this is to purchase a snowplow. And I just mention it to just kind of have people know that that happened. That is a separate process from our budget process because the select board has complete control over that revolving fund, and it's not something that is part of the budget that goes to town meeting. But just again, maybe particularly Nora and Peter, for you on capital budget, DPW is just in the process of getting a $14,000 snowplow, I think, to put on the front of one of their trucks.
Can I ask, do we segregate those funds by department? So if DPW sells a used dump truck, that the proceeds of that sale is earmarked for DPW, fire department?
So my understanding, and Steve Sy should jump in here because he's going to know this better than I am. My understanding is that there's not a formal accounting, but that the players are keeping kind of mental accounts. But Steve,
I think Deb is keeping an actual account. Actually, she's just raised her hand. But
oh, okay.
yeah, I think Deb has it actually split out. So she knows exactly how much went into the fund from each of the departments, and that's what they're supposed to spend out of it.
Yeah, that's true, Steve. I know who spent what, and so they're kind of keeping track of it. But by law, it's just one big fund. So right now, Sean's going to spend a little bit more money than he currently has, but we're not going to go in deficit in the account because he's counting on selling some more equipment, which will get his account back above in a positive thing. But in total, I can't go negative, which I'm not going to. But I do keep track of how much each department has.
And so then, as you said, legally, the select board can do whatever they want, but that pretty much everybody tries to stick within their budgeted amounts.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it for what I had on liaison reports, unless somebody else has something else to add in on that.
I should probably also mention the regional schools. They had their first meeting of the year this week. Unfortunately, none of the three liaisons, nor Dan, was able to make the meeting because that's how we all are. But I figure I would share some of the financial information out of their meeting packet, basically a summary of their operations from last year. So they, in terms of revenues, their total revenues exceeded their budgeted revenues by $194,193, which was 0.74%. And most of that was from Chapter 71, which is a transportation reimbursement from the state. They budgeted for a 65% reimbursement, but they actually got a 90% reimbursement. So that was 188,000 out of that 194. So most of it was from that. And then for their operating budget, they ended with a surplus of $247,290, which was a 0.94% under their budget, for a net surplus on the year of $441,483. And that was there's more details behind all that, but those are the high level numbers.
So that's great. Thanks, Steve. And we will have some interesting opportunities to dig into their coming budget for next year when we get to that. And yeah, as Steve said, none of the liaisons nor me were able to make their meeting, but hopefully going forward, we'll manage that with a little more success. I think we all got, at least I got just caught off guard by the timing and didn't have it on my calendar. Okay, any other liaison reports? Okay, great. Let's see. So I'm going to do a screen share of document with proposed meeting dates, which should be visible. Did that come up?
Yep.
Yeah, great.
Yes.
Okay. So here's what I proposed with briefly what I thought we'd be doing at these meetings for the balance of the year. Apologies for the typo in the original draft. Appreciate the couple of folks who shot me quick emails that the December meeting date was messed up. So December 7th is the date that I intended to have. Do these generally work for people? Any issues, any ones that we would need to shift? I just, at least for me, it helps me to get these on my calendar so I don't let anything else, in block the time. So that was the motivation for putting these out there for the year. But anybody anticipate any problems or issues with any of the dates?
Yeah, I am actually, I get back from an overseas trip on October 26th. So I'm going to assume that I'm probably not going to, with the time difference, make that meeting, but
Okay.
we'll have to see.
Okay.
I'm coming back from Europe, and so anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Likely be tired and jet lagged out. Any other concerns?
I actually just realized that I will be traveling on the 26th as well. I'll be on the road, so I will have trouble with the 26th.
Okay.
The other dates look fine.
Okay. So give me just a second here. You get a calendar popped up since the 26th seems like it's a little problematic. And let's see whether there are other options. Sorry, because I was having Zoom trouble. I'm doing this on my small screen, so I'm trying to get everything squeezed in here. So let's see, we could do October 19th. That the downside is it's a little bit soon in the sense of, my hope was that at this meeting, we'd be able to, if all goes well, finalize guidance. And I think that might be hard to do by the 19th. And the other alternative would be to do November 2nd, week later, and then hopefully we would just be able to finalize guidance then. And then the November 9th meeting, would be a short meeting or maybe no meeting at all if we didn't need it and we got it done. Is November 2nd a date that would work? And Steve, Tsai, anything that I'm not thinking about in terms of dates that would make November 2nd a bad trade?
No, I think November 2nd should be fine. I mean, again, as far as I'm aware, the sort of end of October deadline for guidance is sort of a self-imposed deadline. There's no,
Right.
In my 5 years on advisory, we've never hit October 31st anyways. So I think November 2nd should be fine. What I would propose is that you then just push that November 9th one out to the 16th as a if needed, just so that we don't have the specter of having a meeting 2 weeks in a row.
Okay, that seems like a good idea. So how does that work for people if we do November 2nd and November 16th?
That's fine with me.
Anybody else with conflicts there? Okay. I don't know what Jane's calendar is, but I think we have 8 of us that can be there. Let's do that. And I'll send again, I'll tweak this document and send it around just so everybody has a copy of it. And it sounds like Steve and Mike, Steve, Jeremiah and Mike, that sounds like that'll solve your conflicts and make that a little easier. And we'll have plenty of time in January and February to have every week meetings. So really probably better not to do that now if we don't, since we don't have to. Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I think next is Heidi Doyle on OPEB funding policy. I can give you, Heidi, permission to share a screen if you want. I think, let's see, can I do that?
No, that's okay. I don't have it on my iPad.
Oh, okay. If you want me to put the policy up, I can. Just let me know what you want me to do.
Okay. Did everyone have a chance to look at the policy? I guess would be my first question, whether we need to put it up on the screen.
I looked at it. I have it up on my screen also, so I'm okay.
Okay. And then I was going to, just because we have 3 new people, I was going to do a quick explanation of what this is, if that's all right.
Yeah, that would be great, Heidi. Thanks.
Okay. So the town has 3 unfunded liabilities kind of that should be on our radar. And one is our retirement for the town, the pension plans, and that is actually handled through the county as Middlesex County Retirement. And that is a set amount. They manage it. They send us a bill that we pay once a year. And we're on track to be fully funded for our pension plan by 2037, maybe actually 2036 now is on the latest report. And that's just over $1 million every year that we pay into that fund. Then we also have what's called OPEB, which is the other post-employment benefits, and that's the health insurance for the retirees that is also unfunded, but there is no required guidelines, state guidelines right now to have a formal funding for that. But it is recommended that towns do start addressing this liability because it is a big one and it keeps growing. So our town has roughly had an informal policy of putting about $200,000 every year. 100,000 is in our budget model that's put it on the tax side. And then we've added 100,000 from our free cash amounts so that to make up the total of 200. And we've been informally funding it on that rate. The third one I mentioned, but I'm not going to address tonight, is the regional schools also have liabilities for these that we've never even fully addressed. They do have that kind of bill that they've started to fund it. And at some point they may assess us a future or build that into their assessment. That'll be for an ongoing discussion, maybe if whoever the school liaisons are, to see if that's ever going to come across our radar, but right now it hasn't been brought up for us. So the 2 that we're dealing with are the retirements and then the OPEB. And under the OPEB, there's a couple different ways it's viewed. So we have a company that evaluates our OPEB and then forecasts out and does actuarial tables and comes out with a calculation. This is your liability. This is when you'll be funded. And this is if you keep going at these rates. And the recent one that they just did showed us, of course, our liability is increasing. And because of 4 different factors, stock market went down, number of clients using this went up. They're calculated what they call as our discount rate, which is the amount they do, that actually went down, which means it's pushed out our assets even longer to when we're going to be fully funded. And then our insurance costs, what they anticipate it's going to cost, had gone from 4% to 8%. So when they factored all these things into our calculation, we're going up about another $2.6 million. We had been at a $9.2 million liability, and now all of a sudden we're at $11.9 million. So if we keep funding at $200,000 a year, informally, where we had been looking to be fully funded around 2042, it's now going to the late 2040s. So we had talked to actuariality and say, what can we control? Is there anything we can do to help contain this? If we're growing, what can we do? And we can't control the clients. We can't control the insurance costs. We do have a say, and we can't control the stock market. But we do have a say on our discount rate and what affects our discount rate. One of the things are having formal policies, because if we have a formal policy, they can actually look to it and say, this is what you're committing to funding. We can now make calculations on that policy. And because we don't have a formal one, it actually goes against us, because even though we have an informal one at 200, they can't guarantee that that's going to be in it. So I'm trying to increase our odds of getting a better report going forward and to change our discount rate slightly by getting a formal policy adopted. And it's not to be anything fancy. I had sent, it's just about a one-page thing. They also said that this policy doesn't hold us to something in stone. It's just saying, this is our guidelines, what we're trying to do. It kind of memorializes what we do with our $200,000 informally right now. But then also offers that once we finish paying off our retirement portion, where we're paying over $1 million every year, and in 2037, we can switch some of that. And in this draft, I put in 50% of those funds that can now switch to over onto the OPEB one. So if our retirement's fully funded, we now can look at the health benefits and the others for the retirees and concentrate on funding that more. Again, that's 2037 where we're saying it is, and we have a lot of years to keep. We can change this every year. We can change it in 10 years, but it just gives them something to calculate. And that helps us with when we do our Standard & Poor ratings, and they look for, number one, they do look for whether we have formal policies. And we did, thanks to Stephen and to Peter and Mark last year, they helped put the informal policies on some other areas together into formalizing them. It made a difference on our managerial rating for Standard & Poor. This would just help show that our management is looking at more formal policies. So it will help Standard & Poor, and it will help this discount rate that the actuarial calculations are on from the financial advisors on our OPEB side. So that's a history of why I'm presenting this. And I'm hoping to not expecting a vote tonight, but I'd like to get a discussion going and see if this is the direction that makes sense for the advisory committee. Any questions you might have on it. I am asking the Parker Elmore, who is the advisor from Odyssey Advisors, to come and do a presentation to the select board in October. He did one last year on our OPEB. So he'll be available then for questions next month as well. And kind of go from there. I think he'll see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Heidi. That was terrific. I'll just start out, and I've got a couple questions for you, and then we'll throw it open. So one, I'm a fan of the town doing these policies. It seems like in general, getting this down on paper helps us in a lot of ways. So one kind of small technical thing, it has in the date of 2037 when the Middlesex pension stuff is done. Mm-hmm. Could that date change given their calculations around that? And would it be helpful to adjust the words so that, if that ends up being 2036 or 2039, it doesn't specifically say in 2037 we would do this? I mean, it's a tiny small thing that I wondered about.
I think we could say on or about 2037, and that would be fine. I wouldn't. Again, as we get closer to that date, we're going to know more about Middlesex County. And if we find out it's 2038, we can amend this policy to say on or about 2038. Okay. If we find out it's 2036, I think that's fine. I think that's still so far down the future. I think it's kind of more important to get something down, but I think on or about would be okay to say. Okay.
And then I'm going to just bring up a question actually that Jane Matarazzo put to me. Since she couldn't be here, she's feeding it through me. So she wondered about the language at the beginning saying the town will do 200,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And she thought, well, maybe there'll be a year where the town wants to do something different, and that would require changing the policy, which, as you said, that the town certainly can do. But she wondered, well, would there be some looser language that could be slipped in so that if one year we did 150, it would still be consistent with the policy without having to change the policy. So that was something that Jane had raised with me.
My concern with doing that is it kind of defeats the purpose to me of making a formal policy and statement, because this is to be used for actuarial calculations. So if we make it vague, it's not really going to help them give us a discount rate to calculate on Because then I think they're going to move it down to say, well, what number is it? Is it now 150 that we're going to use?
Right.
My preference would be to say, if we look at it and we have to make an amendment, there's a meeting where we amend the draft policy for that year. But I'm up to hear what everyone would say.
And I guess along those lines, probably we should be doing a quick check of all of these policies every year just to make sure everything is up to date. And of course, for Nora, Steve, and Mike, the deal here is that for this to become a town policy, advisory would vote if advisory is inclined to have the town adopt this policy, advisory would vote, and then subsequently the select board would vote to approve the policy. So those were my quick things. So let's throw it open. If anyone else has comments, concerns, big picture, wording, things.
I like the flexibility, and this is a made up number anyway, because there are so many variables in there, and they make a good living off of uncertainty and projecting the biggest number they can. Again, the discount rate, the stock market, longevity, healthcare costs, well out into the future. And Heidi, what was our rating again from Standard & Poor's?
We got AAA.
So can we go any higher than that?
No, we could go down.
Okay, so without this policy, we attained the highest rating. So you're concerned with the number that's presented by the actuaries, that it's going to change every year because of those things we don't control.
Right.
And I like to have the flexibility when it comes to the policies, because when we set the budget, it immediately, not in 2037, but it immediately affects the tax rate on all residents. And that's something we deal with every year. It's important to fund those liabilities out into the future, because we owe that to the town employees that have given their career to the town, and want to make sure that they have those funds available, those benefits available. So that's, the short and long. Managing the short and long is always the art.
So you'd rather not have a formal policy?
No, I like the formal policy, but to make it as flexible as possible.
So, Peter, that sounds very much like the point that Jane made to me. My understanding is that one approach to the flexibility is that if either we as advisory or future incarnations of the advisory committee, review these policies early in the budget season each year. Policy could be, we could in September of 2025 adjust the policy and decide that 200 isn't the right number, something else is the right number, or that should, we're going to just abandon the policy. So I think that's a source that's one way to approach the flexibility as compared to the actual words in the policy, since every year, or really any time, the policy can be amended. That's a little hurdle to get over, but it's not a giant hurdle to get over.
And so that's a two-step process. So we'd have to advise to a policy change, and then the select board would have to put it on their agenda and vote on it.
That's
correct.
Yes. And then
It is, it's not no hurdle, it's a hurdle. And I presume that that's the reason that the consultants in S&P find it appealing, is because it's not a, it's a formal expression of an intent to try to do this every year, but you can always change your mind.
Well, it's going from a variable to a constant in their actuarial formulas, so that they can come out with
exactly.
a perceived better number in 2 decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
that is going to change every year anyway.
Yeah. Steve,
Right.
Steve Jeremiah.
Yeah, I just have a question. I just want to make sure I understand this. So the bond rating, does that affect all future issuance of debt by the town?
Yes, so when we go out for well, it depends on the bond rating at that time. So when we ever go out for long-term debt, we have to do a bond rating, and whatever comes out at that point sets the tone of what you go for bid. You tend to get a little bit better, not much, but a little bit better rate. It could be a 0.25% point on your bonds. And we go out for bids about every 2 years right now is what we're averaging. So every 2 years is when we've had a Standard & Poor rating. So,
and so it would make sense to me that whatever we could do as far as making a recommendation to limit the amount of outlay of taxpayer dollars, that seems to me to be a no-brainer. So if that means having a formal policy, I think you got to have a formal, a policy.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Steve. What else? Other thoughts on this?
Just a clarifying question here. My internet connection was going in and out, so that's why I turned off my camera, and hopefully it's stable. But unfortunately, Heidi, I missed the early part when you were talking, and so I missed the part of what. And maybe this goes back to Peter's question that we're already at AAA. What is doing this policy going to give us? You mentioned something about discount rate, and it just wasn't clear to me if we adopt this policy, is there concrete incremental advantage that we're going to have over the AAA? Is there a concrete advantage that we're going to have by having this policy?
well, one of the components in our AAA bond rating, we go for a bond, is they do look at your debt ratio, your flexibility, your management scores. There's several different factors that they take into account. And in order to maintain AAA, they're going to want to see that we are maintaining our policies. We've kept up we did increase our management score, and they mentioned directly due to making formal policies versus the informal policies we had. And one of the things they cite is that we were in good shape of working on our OPEB liability. We had been 25% funded, but with these new calculations, we dropped down to about 19% funded. So we're fine for this last bond rating where we got AAA. When I go to borrow, and I'll probably be doing another long-term borrowing, I'm hoping for another 2 years. I hope not to do it next year. I just finished one last month. I'm hoping that in the next 2 years, when we go out, if we don't have something and then these calculations go in and Standard & Poor looks at our OPEB report, it's one of the factors that will go down in their total calculation when they try for AAA, and we might get AA+. I mean, let's hope it's not that. But my goal is to try and be as consistent with Standard & Poor's requirements so that we do maintain the AAA rating. And this is just one of those factors that I felt was a small factor that we could control. If it meant a formal policy that is flexible enough that you can make a change. Yes, it's a 2-step process, coming to advisory, going to select board. But the last 4 years I've been here, we put $200,000 in every year. Most years, I think we're going to be doing at least the 200. If there is a year that we're not, and we'll know what we do, I think we do have the capability to make the change. And in the policy, it does say in their number 3, the town will evaluate, adopt, and implement as legislatively allowed and appropriate policies and strategies to limit future liabilities. So I kind of feel within that should, to me, is enough comfort level with flexibility to help meet some of the Standard & Poor requirements.
Heidi, and the OPEB coverage is relative. We went from 20 to 19, yet we have to compare ourselves to like towns. So we may be going down in coverage, but less than everyone else and still look better. So they weigh all those things in there, and it's not like an absolute number. If you cross 15%, you're going to get a ding or one star taken away.
Right.
It's how do we look compared to towns like towns? So all those other uncontrollable factors are also affecting those other towns too. And what they do with their one controllable factor is, funding it, may or may not be any different than ours. So we just have to be cautious that it's not like, you submit this and you go to the head of the class because you did this. It's prudent. And how do you know this? Because we went through this before, to have as many guidelines, formal policies. An interesting point you made was our debt ratio. We'd probably do a lot better by capping our debt, by saying our debt cannot be more than, and I thought, we may not have put that in the policy.
We have a cap.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
Oh, good. So,
Yes.
good thinking.
It's like
Good thinking.
10% of our operating budget for debt service.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, good. So we have that already.
Yeah.
So I'm for this policy again, and
Yeah.
yes, if it's a two-step process to get it amended,
Yeah.
it's something else we have to keep in mind.
Yeah. Thanks,
Right.
Peter. I think that's an interesting, that's an interesting point about, where are we relative to other towns, and other towns are going to be affected in just the way you said. One way that I've thought about this is that, S&P reaffirmed the town's AAA rating, this last summer when we went through that process. And I sat in on that call, so got a little bit of a sense of sort of how they're thinking about Sherborn. And my impression is the prior call some years before, we were just barely hanging on to that.
Yeah.
I think we made some progress since then. And I think we're a little further above the line than we were, but I think probably close enough to the line that if there are sensible things we can do that would make S&P more comfortable, given that there are plenty of things that we can't control, this is one we can control that maybe would help make them a little more comfortable. Other questions for Heidi, other reactions, other things in the language that people think should change? Because, we'll send this away and come back to it at our next meeting, and things can be amended, adjusted as needed before we actually get to voting on it.
I have one question, Heidi, about the 50%.
Yes.
Is that a number that you sort of pulled out of a hat, or is that kind of a standard number, or is that something that Odyssey Advisors recommended, or where did that number come from? And then my assumption is that if we didn't do this, or if we'd had no policy, essentially that is just money that would go to the general fund. Is that right?
It is money that would go to the general fund, although there'll always be some retirement funds that we have to spend. It's just, they're saying by right before in the 2030s, we'll be up to about 1.8 million a year that we're spending on our retirement. Just because, and that money, then all of a sudden, once we're fully funded, we won't have that cost anymore. We'll have some cost of it going forward, but not that huge amount. Odyssey sent me a sample one, and they wanted to see that the whole amount was going over to OPEB. So I picked 50%, thinking, give them something to work with on the actuarial side. Like Peter said, this number is going to change. It's kind of, depending on all other factors, it's a hard thing to chase down, but if they needed something to calculate, I felt 50% was more reasonable. And honestly, I don't think I'm going to be here in the 2040s when they're going to be looking at this, getting closer to it. So the 2030s. So I think that the fact that we can have a flexible policy and change it as it gets closer was fine. This was just something I was looking to give to the actuaries to work with. I'm happy to put in a different number if anyone wants it. I just thought we weren't going to put all the money in.
But you said Odyssey would have recommended that we put all of the money in. Is there an advantage to stating that we would be putting 100% of it into OPEB?
It probably is. I just felt it was unrealistic one. So I didn't know if they would say too that I don't know how many towns actually signed on to say they're going to move it completely over. I just don't see Sherborn as, once we get money, I think we're going to have many other uses we're going to want to use some of the money for. So if we said 50% of the 1.8 is still 900,000, that was still, I felt, a good number to work with, when right now we have 0 in that number. If we find out that it didn't change the coupon rate enough next year, and they say, well, if you were this, it would be that, well, then we can have a discussion again. But right now we're at 0. This would make it at least 900.
Yeah. Okay.
Anybody else?
Just a question, did we get an interest rate from the bond, floating the bond yet, or is that to come?
No, when on the sale, we had the sale, and of course now I'm blanking because we just did another sale for the short-term one. I think we were 3.14, 3.4, right? It was in the low 3s. And then the band one I just did last week, that was for the 2.98. The 1-year one was higher than the long-term one I just did. That ended up was net was 3.4 something on the net.
That means we're coming on to a recession.
Yeah, except the long-term
Bingo.
ones went up higher too. So I did look, the recent long-term ones had been around 3.7, but it's close. It's been neck and neck, and depends on.
Yeah.
The nice days of quick money are over for the borrowing, at least.
At least for a while.
Yeah.
Anybody else on this? And then we can, Heidi and I can give one more pass through, and anybody else who has thoughts on any word changes and any tweaking of stuff, and then we can come back to it at our next meeting. And I'm getting a sense that there's general support, so that, people seem to think, yeah, this is a sensible thing, generally a sensible thing to do. That seemed to be the sentiment of comments.
And I'm happy to talk to anyone one-on-one or go into more detail, especially for the new people, if you want to see what OPEB and some of these other items that we have.
All right, great. Thank you, Heidi.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for doing that. And we'll be back next month with a final version. Okay, so our next and really the big topic of the night is to start talking about budget guidance. So just a few words really for Mike, Steve, Jeremiah, and Nora, just to kind of set the stage. Really the idea tonight is just really big picture, get a sense of kind of where are people on thinking about this. I will try by our next meeting to have drafted kind of a skeletal letter, because the product that we're working towards now is that guidance letter, which goes out to department heads and budget makers, ideally end of October, early November. And then, as we talked about before, when talking about schedule stuff, if all goes well, finalize that at our early November meeting. So the two key numbers that get set, there's a lot of kind of background context stuff in that guidance letter, but the two key numbers are setting budget guidance for departments. That is, how should their operating budgets be in FY24 relative to FY23, and a number for cost of living or COLA for employees who are not covered by collective bargaining agreements. Last year, the guidance on operating budgets was level funding, and that has been the guidance for operating budgets for a significant number of years. Last year, the COLA that advisory and ultimately the select board approved was 4%. It had been 2% for many, many years before that. So, of course, we're still in this high inflation environment as per the numbers on that background sheet that I sent around. And right, the basic challenge we're facing is pressures on operating budgets of departments, things that they want to do for the town, and high inflation, which puts pressure on those budgets. and also which puts pressure on the COLA, since of course we want to treat town employees in a way that's fair in this high inflation environment. The challenge, of course, is that, well, I think for this fiscal year 23, we're going to see some big increases in property assessments, and maybe even in fiscal year 24, which is based on sales, that valuation property assessments will be based on sales in 2022. Maybe we'll see a bump then, but looking beyond that, given what's happening in the housing market and what's happening in the economy, there are not going to be more increases in assessments. There is not any significant new growth in terms of new construction coming to town, new development on the horizon. So we're going to be in this situation as the town has been for some time, not every year, but for various periods in the past, relatively flat revenue, and the non-property tax revenue has been flat for quite a long time. So relatively flat revenue and upward pressure on spending, especially in this high inflation environment, with that putting pressure on operating budgets and also on COLAs and also on collective bargaining agreements with what are those going to look like and what are the wage increase numbers going to be in those collective bargaining agreements. Police just finished their agreement, the regional schools agreement. The last one, the contract expires this summer and they're going to be negotiating a new contract. This is all being done in a high inflation environment. I haven't seen all the numbers, don't know what the schools are going to do, but I think we could anticipate that there'll be some decent sized increases there. So all of that put together, relatively flat revenue, after, looking further ahead, rising pressure on expenses, that puts upward pressure on tax rates. So I sent around that background document, I pulled a few numbers together. I think there are a few messages that I took from it. I can do a screen share if anybody wants, but I think I'd prefer to be able to see everybody. And when I do a screen share, everybody disappears. But I took the three messages being the obvious one that inflation is high. There's a kind of second order point there that most forecasters think inflation is going to come down quite significantly in the latter part of this year and into next year. Forecasts can be wrong. Federal Reserve is being pretty aggressive about taking steps to rein in inflation. Their forecasts certainly are that inflation is going to come down, and most professional economic forecasters are seeing and saying the same thing. So that forecast says by the time we get to next summer and the start of fiscal 24, those forecasters are saying we're not going to be in the same very high inflation environment that we're in right now, but huge uncertainty about that. And also I put in that document some numbers on what the Federal Reserve not the Federal Reserve, what the federal government has done with wage increases. What's interesting about that is last year when we did 4%, they did something much smaller. And now this year they're coming up with a bigger number. So I thought we could start by talking about budget guidance and what people's senses about how to think about that. And then we could talk about the COLA. And again, meant to be a very wide open, freewheeling, what are people thinking? That will help give me some guidance in trying to draft a guidance letter to have kind of a general sense of where people are. So starting with budget guidance, chair's prerogative, let me put something out there for everybody. So the policy for a good number of years has been level funding, and with kind of two understandings. One, that we would hope that departments would always be looking for savings, economies, efficiencies as ways of continuing to do what they do or doing more with fewer resources. And also in the past, budget guidance has not been instructions to budget makers, department heads. Absolutely under no circumstances would advisory recommend anything above level funding. I think it's meant to be more kind of a starting point in the baseline. And if a department head wanted to do something different, the expectation would be they would come to us in January, February, and they would explain what it is that they're doing, why it's important for the town, and what the budget implications should be. And at least last year, my first year on advisory, there certainly were departments where the ultimate recommended budget was not a level funded budget. But it does provide, in my view, a target, and even in this high inflation environment, seems like to me like a target and a focal point that is a valuable one, with the understanding that some department heads are going to come to us and say, here's something critical we need to do for the town, and it's going to require us to have an operating budget that isn't level funded. So that's sort of a little bit of my rambling big picture on that. Would love to hear views from people on whether what I just said makes sense, or if that seems completely crazy and we should do something different than that.
No, Dan, I think it makes sense. I'd like to go from the general, which you did an excellent job of collating all of the opinions of the government, private economists. And Deb, I think we have a VADAR report that we used to use during our trend budgeting, because we just closed 2022. So we should have actual 2022, 2021, and 2020. And I think the VADAR report did a year-over-year line item increase by department. So that gives us a trend, a cost trend. We're in 2023, where supposedly, well, we're in the thick of the high inflationary period, though 2022 was the start of it because of the supply issues that, caused inflation and some of the other micro drivers of that high inflation. But if we could have that hard data to go on, to even in a high inflationary period, that the expertise of the department heads were able to, or maybe not, control the spending, then that's something that will help us. Or maybe it will show a gradual trend over those 3 years of increased costs that will help inform us in providing guidance, because we want to be as much fact-based as possible. The trend budgeting was useful in the past when there was more than 0% inflation or very low inflation. And if we could get back to at least starting up early up front, looking at those trends for the last 3 closed years, that would be data-driven at the specific department cost center level.
Peter, I worry also, though, that for the trend for the past 3 years is going to be significantly altered by COVID, because various departments will have had either more or more commonly less activity as a result of COVID than they did in their sort of baseline years. And I would assume that it probably hit different departments differently. So it would make it, I don't know, it makes it a little bit challenging to say, okay, well, we can chalk this variance up to COVID, but that one was probably not, or this one was inflation. I mean, I agree that in the past, I've always liked looking at the trend, but I feel like the trend for the past 3 years, I think that essentially the standard deviation is going to be pretty large, and I'm not sure how easy it is to draw conclusions from it.
So I pulled a few numbers. So I pulled numbers on total general fund expenditures, and in 2020 went down, 2021 about flat, and then 22 up 3.25%. Last year up 5%. So that's the COVID pandemic dip in the middle, as there were things we didn't spend money on, as Steve said. Deb, are those numbers that are easy to pull together what Peter asked about?
Yeah, I think they're relatively easy. Yeah.
So seems like they'd be interesting to have and look at, but with the proviso that, as we do that Steve Tsai mentioned, that they might be a bit challenging to use as the basis of a projection going forward in a direct kind of a way.
Yeah, but I definitely think it will give you some basis anyway. So yeah, I'll look into that.
Great, thank you. That would be terrific.
Because we've used them in like February and March
Yeah.
when the departments
Yeah.
come before us.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's good to do our homework, especially because they are useful reports.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
we might as well,
absolutely.
we're going to do that later. We might as well have a look now. That seems good.
Yep, no problem.
What else? Other reactions?
Does it make sense to consider the kind of separate? We already do this, of course, on a department by department basis, but does it make sense to consider that departments that are heavy on material will be hit harder, given the inflation of material versus other departments that may not have materials or things like that? Is that something we should consider?
So I think my reaction is yes, but the challenge is how to do that. So DPW would be one that's obviously material heavy, and there's I think and again Steve Tsai can fill in the history here. Peter, maybe you can too, or Natalie. I think right in the past there's been talk about trying to do differential guidance for different departments, Wasim, very much along the lines of, hey, this department's differently situated than this other department. I think what I took the challenge of that to be is it's pretty hard for us to really figure out exactly who those departments are, and more importantly, how to translate that into what would be a sensible number. And so the fallback, I think, was to recommend level funding, but with an understanding that, conceivably that wouldn't work. And, we could even include some language in the letter. We have to be careful about how we do this, that for departments that are particularly materials heavy, that, advisory would absolutely consider how that affects a department's budget going forward. So that might be a way to handle it without actually trying to figure out what's happening to the price of asphalt, what's happening to the price of gasoline. How much would we want to shift DPW's budget from level funding, and how big a number that might be I don't know, maybe Wasim, that would be one way that we could kind of handle that issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think my feeling. Thanks. My feeling on that is essentially that we're probably not as well equipped to make that prediction than the department heads and budget makers that are dealing with the rising cost of materials. I totally agree with your sentiment, Wasim, and certainly in years past I have advocated for having differential guidance, especially for the larger departments. But at the end of the day, I feel like what we end up doing with level funding seems to work fine. My concern always is that if there are departments that know that their budgets are going to go up significantly for this or that reason, that they're going to chafe against the level funding guidance. And all I can say is that I found in the 3 years that I was chair or vice chair that we never heard any blowback from any of the department heads because of guidance. And I think that they understand that we as advisory are pretty reasonable and we have open ears, and that if they come up with a logical, good reason why a particular line item needs to go up significantly more than the guidance, that we're usually okay with it. And mostly we just need to hear that explanation. So, I think that Sean Colleen will fully intend to go over guidance because it's going to cost a lot more to do what he needs to do, and he's simply gonna drop that budget on us, and then hopefully when it's time to present it to us, he's ready to explain all the various things that are going to cost a lot more. So, I think my opinion is that I've come to the perspective that level funding, despite being a fairly blunt instrument, works well enough for at least for our current department heads. The one area where I would consider having a differential guidance would be the schools. Not only because they make up about 60% of our entire town's budget, but small percentage changes in the school result in six-figure changes in our actual budget. And I feel like if Jane were here, she would probably be speaking to this as well. But I guess there is, knowing that, as I said earlier in the liaison report, they had a net surplus of $450,000 at the region. And I guess the question would be, all right, well, can we dig a little bit deeper on that and come up with a way to set our guidance that encourages them to have a smaller budget surplus? That would be my main question about the budget guidance.
And so I want to come back to that point Steve just made. Wasim, had you wanted to get in on this point about materials costs and so on? Did we lose?
No,
this?
I really, it was more asking the question because, to be honest, I don't have an opinion about it. I don't know how we would do, how we would implement it. So I completely agree with what you said and with what Steve said. It's just a thought, but how would we do it? I have no idea. So it sounds reasonable. I agree with you, Steve. Maybe the blunt instrument of the level funding, and then look at it on a case-by-case basis. With the understanding, of course, we all know material cost has gone up significantly.
Yeah, and fuel costs also, there's plenty of vehicles being run in town and they're all going to be costing a lot more money to run. So we know it's going up.
Yeah. So, part of the letter provides, some context for what's been happening. And I can do some work in trying to write some language that kind of acknowledges and recognizes, very explicitly recognizes and acknowledges those changes as kind of a setup for saying, of course, advisory is going to be reasonable when budget makers come and say, if it's Sean or whoever, here's what I need to do, and this is what it's going to cost to do it. So I think maybe I can craft some language that would kind of help with that. Coming back to Steve's point about the schools and differential guidance. So, I think this is just kind of picking up what Steve said and maybe making it a little more concrete, right? Their leftover money, ends up getting counted. I'm not an expert on school accounting, but E&D is the term for the account excess and deficiency, and we could have I think we could have a suggestion of how much excess they should be targeting. I think the state says they can have up to 5% of their budget in that it can land in that account. And if it's more than that, then they have to spend it down. We could, I don't know, Steve, if this is where you were going, but we could have a number suggesting that they, not have it be more than 4%. And, if it's going to be more than 4%, spend it down. I don't know exactly what the language would be, but there might be a way to make what you said, Steve, do something like that to try to capture what you said.
Yeah, for some reason, I want to say that we have tried that tactic in the past and it hasn't gone over very well.
Meaning that the school committees chafed at that, and Dawn and the budget makers over there chafed at that.
Yeah, and part of the challenge also with the region is that we're not in control of them. They're a separate legal entity, and they answer to both Dover and Sherborn, and in fact, Dover to a slightly higher percentage than Sherborn based on the number of students. And I think because Dover probably would not agree with that policy of keeping E&D at 4%, it makes it very difficult for us to push hard on that. So I think that the good thing is that their E&D is capped at 5%. Essentially their E&D is more or less analogous to our free cash, which is also recommended to be between 3 and 5%. It's just that I believe they're hard capped at 5%. So they have to turn back anything that's over 5%. Whereas if our free cash happened to be over 5%, it would still be free cash.
Yeah.
So that would be a tactic. Which it wouldn't surprise me if various advisory committees cyclically attempt that every 5 years or so, because there's a loss of institutional knowledge and people are like, why don't we try this? And then it fails miserably. And then we're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's why we don't do that.
So did you have another strategy? Did you have another strategy in mind?
My thought was based on what Jane was saying about the Chapter 71 transportation reimbursements.
Yeah.
Which essentially it's there's a prediction of how much the state is going to reimburse a district's transportation costs. And historically, I believe the region has been budgeting for a 65% reimbursement. But last year it was 90%, and that accounted for most of their revenue surplus. The year before that, it was 95%. And then the year before that, it was 84%. So I think a suggestion that Jane had made would be potentially to say, why don't you try budgeting for a reimbursement on your transportation that's closer to what it's actually been the past 3 years, right? Essentially sort of like a trend budgeting for the Chapter 71 reimbursement. Say 80, if they made it 85% rather than 65%, essentially then they would project a higher revenue and ideally therefore have a lower assessment to the towns.
Right.
It would be a pretty modest gain probably. It was, what was it, $188,000 last year that they had over, and we would get 45% of that, right? So somewhere less than $90,000 probably, which that ends up being a pretty small change, but it's what is it, about $15,000 is a penny in our tax rate. So if our assessment went down by $90,000, that would be what, six cents on our tax rate, right? So
it matters. So you were thinking not a kind of overall, here's what you should do with E&D, since presumably Dover would hate that. You were thinking kind of identifying a couple of particular areas where and maybe Chapter 71 is the only one where it would make sense to do this. Maybe there are others where they've kind of consistently missed in recent years, and really zero in on those. And, here's something you could do on those that might alter, the budget numbers and what their assessment to Sherborn is.
Yeah. Because if you look at their operating budget, it fluctuates as being under budget of 1% to maybe 4.5–5%,
Right.
But I can imagine that it's not that easy to accurately predict and budget for whatever they have, a $27 million budget, right? And so being 1 to 5% under budget, 5% is probably a bit much, but last year they were less than 1% under budget. It's I don't know. It would be difficult for me to approach them and say, you guys got to do a better job of budgeting. Look, you were 0.94% under budget last year. I'm like, that's pretty darn close, So, and then with the E&D, knowing that there's probably going to be pushback from Dover on that point. So really, it's a matter of, not saying you have to manage the money you have a particular way, but say, look, every year there's this extra pot of money that's coming to you that, based on recent trends, we can be pretty confident you're getting more money than you're anticipating from the state. So
Right.
why don't we actually just accurately predict the amount
Right.
of money that you're actually getting from the state? And that would be a way of ideally reducing the town's assessment without hamstringing their actual operations at all.
Yeah, just have to, I guess, watch so that if there's more, assume more revenue coming in, that doesn't then lead to additional ways to spend that revenue as compared to reducing the assessment to the town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, it's,
But I mean, we can watch that.
Yeah.
We can watch that.
And something that would probably need to be cleared up with Dawn is that if say that they budgeted for 85% and actually they only got 65%, and so now they had a shortfall of 150K, I would assume that that's the type of thing that you could just pull out of E&D, right? That E&D, that's what it's there for.
I would think so.
So that it wouldn't result in a higher assessment to the town because they predicted the wrong number for their reimbursement.
Yeah, it would cause them some heartburn and everybody, but yeah. Okay. So what other thoughts on guidance?
And there was a time when we used to start at the end, and we had a model which I think is still a tab on the model that we use for the budget, where we know the existing tax revenue. By statute, it can only go up 2.5%. We throw that on top of it. We load up this year's budget. There's a piece for new growth, which I think Wendy's going to come in with a few $1 million this year in new growth for us.
I think it's going to be smaller than that, Peter.
Well, then let's start assessing more.
Yeah.
We have.
I know, Wendy. I always ask for more, and you give us what it is.
Well, Peter, you need to build a guest house on your property, and then that'll be some new growth.
There you go.
So Peter, let me just jump in. Let me just jump in for a second, Peter, and then come right back to you. So Deb and I have been working on exactly that, on updating the budget model, that we used last spring to roll forward to fiscal year 24. It's not quite ready for prime time. And there are unknowns about what the assessments are going to be, unknowns about collective bargaining agreements, unknowns about what's going to happen to benefits costs. So it's a useful tool, but at this stage, at least as Deb and I have been putting it together, there's enough that isn't known that I find it really interesting, but I'd be cautious about leaning too heavily on it. But hopefully before long, we could share that around so people could look at it and play with it.
Right. It's not easy. It's an art. And we used to use that before budgeting and fill in those variables because, again, even new growth, it was 100,000, 150,000. We just threw a number in there, and it was more great, it was less. Oops. But the budget's a budget, revenue's the revenue, and what we're going to advise we can put in there. And then we always had this surplus, we call it the piñata, that absorbed, some overage, but it came to a tax rate. And really, that's interested, disinterested residents. That's one thing that gets their attention.
Of course.
Is what will the tax rate be
of course.
If things happen? And part of those things it starts with the guidance. So we're going to guide where last year's budget, which we're 3 months into now, January, July, August, September, 3 months into now. We're drafting off of that. So we hope that comes to fruition, that's pretty close to actuals. We don't really know, but we're giving guidance off of that. And it's again, a helpful guidelines prior to guidance, even though it's an imperfect tool, because we want to track how well we're ending up with that, overall budget divided by the capital stock of where everyone's real estate income that turns into a tax rate.
Yep.
And then that's my point. So you're already going down that path.
Yeah, we are indeed. So Deb and I have been working on that with some help from Heidi as well, and Wendy on, the parts of it that they.
Yeah, Wendy, 2 million in new growth.
Yeah. So Peter, I completely agree with your sentiment, just with the proviso that I mentioned before about, the challenges of relying too heavily on that, or putting something out there that people would take as, oh, advisory says my tax rate's going to be this. And then, we get further on and, well, actually that's not right, because, there are a bunch of numbers that shifted around.
Yeah, I've definitely found that, ultimately the tax rate, there are things that swing it that we just didn't predict. I mean, I don't think in any of our models did our tax rate go to 1903 last year, but that's where it is.
Nancy, do you want to jump in here?
You're muted, Nancy.
Okay, and I'll put the video. I just wanted to thank you. First of all, thank you for moving that date, because it's very difficult for the Personnel Committee to come up with a COLA recommendation early on. And I think Steve can attest to the fact that we had to move out your approval of it and, until that first week in November. And last year we did something that we have never done before, and that was we gave you a range because we were rather cowardly trying to anticipate what the year was going to bring economically, so forth. And for the new people, I think it's important for them to understand that the COLA that we all recommend does not affect the people who have contracts, because they can negotiate them, and the unions and the school. So it really affects a very small piece of the working population. So my speech to personnel every year before I got on it was, let's not balance the budget on the backs of the people who are doing our work for us. So it's a difficult thing to pick out of the air, because we're usually one of the first communities to be in that process. So we don't have that to rely on. And you were extremely helpful last year, because Dan, I think you had a bunch of the government figures before we were able to get them. And you all had such thoughtful conversation before you came down on the figure that I think you could see made sense in what happened this year. So I have a lot of confidence in you, but the timeline is always difficult for personnel to come to you in a timely manner. So we appreciate that you're not trying to do it in the middle of October. So.
Yeah. So thanks, Nancy. And that's a great opening to talking about COLA issues. I'll just slip in a couple other comments on that before we kind of open that up. One, kind of as Nancy hinted at, the Personnel Board does make a recommendation on COLA, which is on the one hand independent of ours, but we try very hard to coordinate and ideally land as much as possible in the same place. Mike Winters, who's the liaison for Personnel Board, and I have a meeting scheduled with Vicki Rellis to talk with her. She's out of the office for a while, so I think that doesn't happen until a bit later in September. But we have in mind to get that started with one, kind of beginning that conversation with the Personnel Board about what they're thinking on a COLA. And also, Nancy, let me slip in for you. I think one other thing that we're really interested in is what have other towns done last year on the COLA, and sort of how does Sherborn's 4% line up with what other towns did last year? I've heard anecdotes of other towns that did less than that, although towns have different pay structures. With some have step increases and so on, which Sherborn doesn't do. But Nancy, when we talked to Vicky, that's one of the things that we're going to try to see if it's possible to get some data on sort of where's Sherborn relative to other towns on that. So interested in thoughts people have on COLA. Last year, we did 4%, which was more than the federal government did. Less than inflation. And so sort of confronting some of the same issues this year of if we want to stay at 4%, if with a forecast of lower inflation, we would want to step that down to something like 3%. All, of course, pending conversations with the personnel board, what we learn by kind of getting some data on what other towns have done, to sort of have a sense of where are we relative to the local labor market here. But those are a few thoughts. Interested in other thoughts, reactions, would love to get a sense of what people are thinking would be fair to both town employees, fair to the town taxpayers, and getting a sense of that sentiment will be super helpful for me in trying to craft some words for a very, very first draft of a guidance letter.
Yeah,
Well,
for me at
maybe-
least, it's kind of a tough one, because the inflation is so high right now, but yet then the predictions are that it's coming back down. I mean, I guess the way that I see it is that our COLA, it tends to be less of a prediction of what's coming, but a correction for what has just happened. And at least that was my kind of perspective last year, was that, I think that at the time we set our guidance, the CPI over the previous 12 months was something like 7.5%. I did a lot of mental gymnastics to justify only giving 4% when the CPI had been 7.5%. And I think it had to do with the fact that the previous year we had given a COLA that was higher than the CPI, and then I was looking just at the Northeast and not the national. And so when you put all that together, over the previous 24 months, we were still keeping up with the CPI for the Northeast, But now it's like, all right, well, if we accept the fact that we were barely keeping up last year, and now, at least in this background document you provided us, it says that over the previous 12 months, through July at least, it was up another 8.5%. If we give another 4%, that means that we're 4.5% behind, right? So, and then seeing the fact that the federal government is going higher, I mean, it would be interesting to know what the surrounding towns are doing. I don't feel great about giving more than 4%, having just given them a 4% COLA last year. But I just feel like looking at the inflation environment right now, it wouldn't be unreasonable to go higher than 4%, even though it doesn't make me feel great.
One proportional aspect here is the salaries, wages, and bonuses that this number impacts is about 10% of the workforce, because police, fire, DPW, everyone's in a union and or collective bargaining, and so it's really a small fraction of the overall spend that this number will influence, and so yes, it's important for those individuals, but when you step back and how it trickles down and affects again the tax rate or our projection of the tax rate, it has less impact than it seems because of those contracts.
Steve, Jeremiah?
Yeah, so I'm just curious, in the past, has the COLA number for those small group of people had any bearing or influence on the negotiations of those within the collective bargaining side?
I don't believe that it's had any influence on the negotiation. What I would say is that, and this is sort of also as a response to Peter's point about it only affecting a small number. In the past, and this is one of those things where it's like, oh, how much do we want to maintain a consistent message? In the past, when our COLA has been 2%, and then various CBAs have been giving annual salary increases that were greater than 2%, I think that the line from advisory was generally, we don't really care what your CBA says. Our guidance is that your operating should be level funded and your salary should go up by 2%. And so that gives us a total number for what your department's budget guidance is. And if your CBA resulted in your employees, union employees, getting a 4% increase, well, that's on you for doing a bad job negotiating your CBA. We're not granting you a 4% increase in your salaries just because that's what the CBA says. You're going to have to give us that back in your operating budget. I don't know how hardline we were in maintaining that message, but that is generally the message that we tried to send out to the departments that had CBAs. But then last year I was kind of like, well, if that's how we were going to be in the lean years, well, in this year, if we're going to give a 4% COLA, if there are CBAs that are in effect that did not predict a global pandemic with high inflation, and so therefore their CBA only allowed for a 2.5 or 3% increase this year, do we grant them a 4% increase in their salaries since that's what our guidance is? So that's the way that I think that our COLA has an effect on the departments that have a CBA, more in the sense of what is our true guidance to this department. But when they negotiate their CBA, it's behind closed doors, and I don't think they even look at what the town's COLA is.
Do you think, Steve, that might be different in a high inflation environment than in many years when inflation was super, super low?
I couldn't say. I don't know.
I mean, that would be I think that would be I don't know if it would be different, but it does seem like we're in a different environment. But maybe it doesn't matter because they would point to all the same inflation numbers, and what advisory recommended on a COLA isn't going to carry as much weight as, what were these various inflation numbers that people can point to. So Steve, so it sounds like your sense was 4% as a floor, maybe higher, kind of struggling with thinking that through.
That's probably where I'm at. Only because we've seen that the inflation has sustained at this rate, for the past 12 months, which I don't remember anymore what the forecasts were for CPI, at this time last year, what the forecast was for the following 12 months, but I don't think it was as high as it is now, right?
No, and this is why so two comments. One, why the forecasts need to be taken with a grain of salt. So last year, the forecasts were inflation is going to fall. And of course, it did just the opposite. It went up more. I think the economic rationale for this year's forecast is a lot stronger than the economic rationale for last year's forecast, but it's forecast. It could be wrong. Don't know what's going to happen. Plenty of things could go wrong that could make those forecasts not correct. Other thoughts on COLA and how people are thinking about what would make sense?
So I also view 4% as a floor. Yeah.
Okay.
So that I don't think it's fair to go anywhere below 4. On the high end, I mean, I do think of the COLA as kind of what is it? Long-term averaging, right? Of prior accumulated. So there are a number of years where we hit 2%. That was a little higher than the rate of inflation. Last year we went a little lower. This year I anticipate that we will again go lower right? So I don't think we'll approach the maybe not even the CPI of the Northeast out of the 7%, but
Yeah.
definitely not nowhere.
Yeah, certainly not in terms of what it's been over the last year. Yeah, okay, thanks, Wasim. Others? I could do my college professor thing and try to stare everybody down to get a comment, but I won't do that.
Those
Just
poor
trying to-
Wellesley girls.
I'm sorry, say that again.
No,
Oh.
you must have interesting classes there.
Yeah, classes at Wellesley are always interesting. Anybody else who hasn't offered a view want to? I'm not trying to push anybody to speak, but just want to make sure everybody has a chance to offer perspective. Super helpful, I think, as I'm trying to think about the start of a letter and the conversation that Mike and I are going to have with Vicky in a couple of weeks. Okay, all right.
Do you want me to, I'll ask a question, Dan.
Yeah, Nora, go ahead.
Okay. Speaking for BC girls, Peter. What number are we actually looking at? And is there something that I can look at so that I can offer, like, for example, employees? And what's the actual dollar amount we're looking at if we do 4% or whatnot? I mean, for the total amount.
So I think that could be pulled out of this budget model. I don't have that at my fingertips.
Like any amount, how many employees? And I'm sorry, I'm just speaking as a newbie that's trying to learn. And since you were asking a couple times for questions, that was one of my things, like, what are we talking about for dollar amount?
So as Deb or may have some numbers on head counts, as Peter pointed out, and Nancy did too. It's not a huge number of employees because just do the head counts, police, DPW, schools, that's most of the head count. So it's, people in town hall and a few others. It's, I think Peter, or Nancy tossed out the number. I don't have the head counts in front of me, but maybe 10% of town employees. It's modest. Deb, did anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't want to say it's escaping me how many it is, but it's really not many because of the police and DPW and the school are all. I don't know. I want to say it might be like 40 people. It's really not that many.
Yeah, and the difference between an extra percentage point for that group adds up to a small effect on the tax rate because it just doesn't add up to that much money.
I like what Steve is saying because and there was one model where we have salaries, benefits, and then operating expenses broken out by department. That if you apply that 4% to all salaries, wages, and bonuses, regardless of source of COLA increases, that's an estimate of the spend given guidance. And then, the operating piece, what do we believe that's going up given the supply chain challenges that we're all running into that's a driver of inflation. And again, I'm just going back to my mental vision of the model, which can answer many of the questions or even prompt more when you step back and see where the $30 million go from last year's budget to future budgets. And then the monthly, and I hope everyone receives Deb's very valuable monthly department review of how we're doing compared to the budget, because that's really the proof in the pudding is each month, are we on track with 1/12 of the budget going forward? Because that reinforces the work we did last year, the assumptions we did this year, and helps inform us going forward. Because if we're, over or under, that does also tell us. But then there's seasonality that, the spending is slow, but then picks up at the end, and hopefully it tend to flatten out. Definitely when the year's over, it flattens out. But that's a helpful tool. I'll just give it for that.
Nora, just to give you a rough estimate, because I have a copy of Dan's super secret working copy of the budget model where he's built some of these tools. But each percentage point in the COLA, when applied to just the non-contract employees, is just a hair under $27,000 on the total budget.
Thank
so
you.
4% is about $107,000 on the total budget.
Yeah, so
that's assuming Dan built this model correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that sounds about, yeah,
And that's
that
gonna
sounds
be-
about right. I was going to say 30. I was thinking it was about 30,000. So
And that's going to
that
be,
sounds about right.
That's going to be like, 2 or 3 cents on the tax rate.
Yeah, about 50. I think about every $15,000 or
15,
so
right.
is about
Yeah.
1%, 1 penny on the tax rate.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. That helps. Thank you.
Thanks. I didn't remember the numbers and I didn't have that. Given I'm doing this on a small screen tonight, couldn't pop the spreadsheet open. So thanks for finding that, Steve. Okay, so that's great. And I will, I think a fair bit of this guidance letter is kind of an update of what's often in these letters with context and sort of where we are. Obviously, it's very premature to put any hard numbers in because I think there's a lot of information still to learn before getting to that. But I will try to have at least a skeletal draft that we can look at by our next meeting. And then as we get more information and run down a few of these issues, can try to refine that down towards getting some actual numbers in. Okay, so what is it, 8:50? All right, so let's talk minutes and see if we can get a couple sets of minutes approved, and then we'll wrap up. So 2 sets of minutes, June 1st that we're collecting, and also our last meeting on August 17th. I'll just note that since the last draft, the draft that I circulated, I made a few tweaks. I will pop this up on the screen in a second so everybody can see. And the kind of consequential ones I highlight in red, so they should be very visible. Other things were just, changing formatting or, tweaking a very small word here or there. I will note that I was asked to, the one thing that'll look a little different is I was asked to include a statement at the bottom of the minutes indicating what folks can do to get documents presented at the meeting. And the sad thing from my perspective is that it's my email that goes with that. Hopefully not too many people look at these minutes, but anyways, whatever. Let me pop up the June 1st ones and do a screen share. Okay, and let's see here. If I'm going to do this a different way, just a second here. I can't, I have to do this a different way so that I can actually edit these in real time as we talk. Sorry, just a second here. Okay, so let me close that. Let me bring these over. All right, can everybody see these? Is that showing up all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let me just scroll through. This is mostly the version that you saw with a few small edits. Let me stop here, give everybody a chance to take a quick look.
That number where it says Sherborn is eligible to receive, it's a weird number format in the second bullet there. 1.295, 761 M.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So,
like,
yep.
like, so
You?
it's weird format there. So why don't we just make it normal?
How's that?
Perfect.
Great. Thank you. What else? We can put a period at the end of that sentence too.
Yeah, and I guess the period at the, well, I guess they're incomplete sentences anyways, but
What we'll be consistent. But again. All right. So scrolling on.
there is a thing under the advisory input on prioritization section in the
Yep.
third bullet. It says a bucket for what Steve's side described above, but nothing above indicated what did I describe.
All right.
So I wasn't sure what that was actually referring to, and I don't remember what I said.
Signature projects. Why don't we say a bucket? I think we could say a bucket. Wasim, if I'm messing this up, help me out here, but a bucket for urgent projects. And a third bucket for what select board member Jeff described as COVID related. And I added in the title select board member just to identify Jeff a little more specifically than just a name.
Yeah, I'll just have to say this was a very tough meeting to capture the minutes for.
And on that score, Wasim, a big thank you for putting this draft together. Yeah, it was an all over the place meeting, and I agree, not so easy to capture. I'm going to keep scrolling unless someone asks me to stop. And as we get into this list of our records, I was intending to attach at the end of these, after it gets converted to a PDF, the two presentations that Jen Thompson, the two documents she prepared. There's a PowerPoint, and then there was a doc that just had a verbal description of the projects, and just thought the town did that work to put together a compilation of what the proposed projects were that we considered, that the select board considered. So I will just tack those onto the end. And so for that reason, thought that the way Wasim had the kind of brief references to these projects was just great, because all the detail will be in the attachments if anybody wanted to dig into it. And then I did, with the red, those were spots where I, Wasim, change your wording just a bit. So just take a look at that and make sure you're okay with that. And then we get to the end. And I'll obviously take the red out before these get posted. But there's a reference to the documents that I said I'd attach, and then these instructions I got to say that if anybody wants to get any more info, they can get in touch with advisory chair.
So why do you have to include your email if you're attaching the documents to the minutes anyways?
So the advice I got was to just include this at the bottom always. Because, if there's any other document that I'd have to go back and, or maybe Wasim would remember if there was any other document that somebody popped up, that in principle, then they could get it. You're right that it's not really relevant for this one. Probably more relevant for the next one, or we could just tack all the docs on. But I took it as the suggestion being just stick it in as boilerplate. So if there aren't any other comments on these, I would happily entertain a motion to approve minutes.
I move we approve the June 1st minutes as reflected on the screen this evening.
Second.
Okay, let's do, I'm gonna now close, I'm gonna stop my share so I can actually see everybody. And let's go ahead and do a roll call. So I'm just gonna go in the order I'm seeing people. Steve Tsai,
Aye.
Natalie, all right, we'll come back to Natalie. Nora,
I'm here.
But if I'm not there, can I still approve that if that's all right?
you can. We're just doing routine business. So
All right, thank you.
yeah, thanks. Steve Jeremiah, you're
You're
muted.
muted.
You're muted, Steve.
If I was not present at that meeting, can I actually vote for that?
You can. It's
You
fine.
can.
Okay, I vote aye.
Great, thank you. Peter,
Aye.
Wasim,
Aye.
Natalie, are you back?
I am. Aye.
Great, and I am also aye. So that puts us at 8-0 for approval.
7-0.
Seven. Who did we miss?
Is
Mike also
iPhone
votes
Mike
aye.
Winters?
Oh,
Okay.
yes, Mike dropped off. Yes, okay. Yes, thank you. Turns out I can't count. I can do some other things, but I can't count. Okay, great. So give me just a second here. Let me get the August 17th minutes popped up. And let me again do a screen share and get to those. Okay, August 17th. These are a little shorter and easier. So some routine stuff at the beginning. Discussion of liaison assignments.
And Dan, my intention was also when converted to PDF to just add the liaisons.
Perfect. Okay.
So either you can do that, or if you want me to do that, I can do that. It's up to you.
I'm happy to do it because I tweaked a few other tiny things in
Okay.
the. Let me just gonna put. All right. See attachments for liaison. There we go. Okay, great. That's excellent. Oh, attached as appendix A. You've actually got it here. I wasn't going to do this as appendices. I was just going to stick them on. So could I just do this as C attached?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Initial discussion of a little bit of background for budget guidance. And a little then standard stuff at the end. Any other than misspelling liaison, any other corrections or suggestions? Okay, again, I'd happily entertain a motion for these minutes.
I move to accept the minutes.
I second.
Great. Okay. Just keeping track. Okay, let me stop my share and let's vote. And I will, I'll go in reverse order on my screen this time. Wasim.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Steve Jeremiah. Great. Nora. Natalie.
Aye.
Steve Tsai.
Aye.
And I am also an aye, so that puts us at 7-0. Okay. Assuming that
Mike's still here, and I vote aye on both.
Oh, so excellent. Did I miss you the first time?
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay. I see what I did. My apologies. Your name's not showing up And since you had your camera off, I just didn't remember that iPhone was used. So apologies for that.
Oh, no worries.
I'm really glad you jumped in because we're at 8:00 then on approval of both of the minutes, which is, a good place for it to be. So unless anybody has any other thing to bring up at the last minute, I think that's the end of what we wanted to do tonight. I would say thanks to everybody for a very good meeting. Thanks for not making it too hard for me the first time I ran one of these meetings from beginning to end. And I would happily entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move
So
to
moved.
adjourn.
I second.
Second.
Okay. All right, so we have Natalie and Nora. That's great. Okay. And we will be back on October 5th, as per the schedule. And let's just do a quick vote on adjourning. And Mike, we'll start with you this time.
Aye.
Thank you. Steve Tsai,
Aye.
Natalie,
Aye.
Nora,
Aye.
Steve, Jeremiah,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Wasim.
Aye.
And I am also aye, so that's 8-0. We are adjourned. So thank you again all very much. And see y'all on October 5th. And if anybody, wants to get to me for any reason, just shoot me an email or text or whatever. Happy to follow up on any things from tonight or what's coming up next time. See you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.